Hey, what is up, y'all? It's Sonia,
It's Genevieve.
And Teresa.
bringing you fresh and zesty content for your education and enjoyment.
In this episode, we're going to talk about how to have a conversation, starting with why do we need to know how to have a conversation?
But before we get into that, we would just like to say thank you to one of our friends, Jake Cardenas, for hosting an episode and basically interviewing us for the announcements for one of our schools. So thank you to him not only for that, but also he was able to give us a lot of good ideas to use in the future and hopefully apply as well. So thank you for that. Now, now we can get ready to hop into it.
Like general questions here. So, why do you guys think we need to know how to have conversations?
I think especially with now, everything is so polarized and we're so divided, and I know people are tired of hearing us saying, oh yeah, we're so divided, and oh, we're so, polarized. But yeah, it's true. And essentially right now, everything is deemed political, even when it's not. Political has to do with the actions and the functions of a government, okay? If it involves legislation, then, yeah, it's sort of political. But I think a lot of social issues people tend to shy away from, or some people tend to shy away from and say, oh, I don't want to get into this, let's not get too political in the workplace or etc. When it's really not. These are social issues that are affecting a lot of people, and I think it's worth talking about and having a decent conversation. Granted, timing and context is also very important to keep track of, but if you have the time, there's no problem just sitting down and having a general conversation about anything, really. We forget to find a sort of common ground, and stuff time, especially with the internet. We basically create an echo chamber that we surround ourselves with people that agree with us or have similar experiences, and it's easy to forget that outside of that echo chamber that we create, we forget that the person that we're conversing with has their own opinion that is shaped with their unique experience, and that probably not align with your thoughts and viewpoints. It's easy to see this other person as a sounding board where you just kind of expect them to bounce back the same ideas that you're trying to convey. And when they have different opinions and expectations, that's where the disconnect really starts. So I think that's why it's really important to learn how to have a good conversation, to get past that barrier.
Yeah, I definitely think I'd like to go back to one of the things Teresa said about the fact that even though everything is so polarized nowadays, everybody has something that they can share for common ground. You can find something that you guys have in common, no matter how different you are, and I think people forget that everybody that you might be arguing with is a person with their own unique experiences and normally have a reason for thinking the way they do. Nobody is just gonna think the opposite of opinion of yours just to spite you. There's a reason behind that. And taking the time to listen and understand not only why they think that, but where they're coming from, and maybe not agreeing with them. You do not have to agree with somebody. That is definitely something that I think you're not going to change somebody's mind about their opinion sometimes, and that is okay. Most times you're not going to be able to. And just being able to understand that, okay, this person and I, we have different viewpoints, but that's okay, and we can still find common ground to make a compromise on top of that. It's something that is heavily lacked today in society, and something that I think if people just learn how to communicate and understand and listen to each other, that a lot of different problems and issues in the world wouldn't be as large of a deal as they are.
I was thinking it's important to have conversations, not only because to better your own knowledge of how people around you think and perceive everything, but also because every single job or career option, if you really think about it, you have to know how to communicate with others, giving an oral presentation, pitching an idea to a client, or helping out a customer in customer service. Like, you need to know how to interact with people in a way that both of you benefit, or that someone comes out of this conversation thinking, hey, that guy really helped me, or hey, that guy made me learn something that I didn't know about before. And we're social creatures too, as humans, so we have to know how to interact with each other just for our own health.
definitely think it goes back to the scale of things and how, on the smallest scale, we need conversation to not go crazy. Even introverts, we need that conversation. We need those, just those interactions in our everyday lives, because sometimes thinking about and listening to others can enhance who you are as a person. And on a much, much larger scale, it comes down to compromising and, as a society, figuring out what is best by communicating with each other and seeing everybody's different viewpoints.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You made some really good points there. So then I think that kind of brings us into why is it so difficult for people to have conversations nowadays? Of course, you both brought up the fact that we may differ in opinions, so that kind of turns us off to talking to those people. But what do you think are some other reasons?
If we're disagreeing with someone else, we sort of stop listening and we're just hearing the other person. And my second grade teacher made this really good point. She made the distinction of a difference between listening versus hearing. So she said hearing was essentially the acknowledgement that the other person is spewing out words, whereas listening involves contemplation and reflection to craft a response to the other person. So I guess that's kind of why teachers don't want questions until the end, because they know that while we have our hand raised, we're focused on our question. We're just hearing them as opposed to listening to them.
Another example of that, as much as I know I hated them when they were happening, were Socratic seminars. I think I hated them because I didn't want to have to talk and be involved in a classroom setting sometimes. But it's mainly the material it was on as well. Maybe I didn't want to read the passage that day, or it was on something that I just didn't care to talk about. But even still, that the way it forces you to listen to your peers before you're able to speak, and that silence in between everyone talking, where we just kind of all trying to figure out who's going to speak next, but also kind of taking in what was just said, is very beneficial, as much as I know I used to hate it.
I definitely remember the Socratic seminars and how there was that period of silence where you had to wait to see if someone else was going to talk, and if no one talked, then you had to talk just to break the silence because you got marked down points if you were quiet for too long. Yeah. That just brought back memories from 6th grade. But yeah, like, I definitely agree with both Teresa and Genevieve. Um, Along the line, we kind of lost, by we, I mean just the population in general of humanity, we kind of lost our ability to listen because with the rise of social media and blogging and all this, we're just able to spew everything out and then we don't even have to listen to a response. But when you're in person and you're talking face to face, you have to wait for the other person to respond. You can't just spew things and then expect not to have a reaction, because that's not how that works. Like, everyone reacts to everything.
And I also think it goes back to the point where if someone else is talking and what they're saying completely is contradictory to your viewpoint and your experience, well, again, when you stop listening and you're just hearing, essentially what you're hearing at that point is this person has no consideration for X, Y, and Z, which is why I so strongly believe in this, but with him bringing up these points that it just sort of, again, you're hearing them, and then with hearing and not listening, you're again making assumptions about the other person, and those assumptions sort of, I guess, turn angry, and then at that point you're just not having a civil discourse, it's just more arguing, which again gets you nowhere.
I definitely think something that I guess I just never understood was the fact that why people might not like to listen, and maybe it's because they heard something they didn't agree with and all of a sudden they no longer care what that person has to say. But I also think it's interesting that because that person doesn't agree with you, maybe you want to figure out why that's the case. Or, because not everybody is, but there's a reason behind that, and if you just listen to this person talk, you'd understand that. And it's something that's always used in lectures. I know our band teacher brought it up in a meeting one of these days, but about listening to others talk and how you can only say so many words per minute, but you can understand and comprehend a considerable amount more than you can say in that time. Which, first of all, lets your mind wander, which is why you might stop paying attention when someone's speaking. But also the fact that your brain is hungry for information. So why is it going to listen to this person talk if they're being slower than you can comprehend? If you could work on something else, so getting distracted, I think, is a big part of it as well. But also, that just means that you can intake more than you'll ever be able to say. So why not listen? Why not comprehend? Because that'll help you out much farther in the long run than speaking ever will.
So I guess that brings up to the question, why should people know how to converse with people that they don't know? Personally, I believe it goes back to the point that I made about echo chambers. If you truly want another person's viewpoint and you want to expand your knowledge on a certain topic, you have to look for, I guess, personal philosophy of mine. You have to go to someone or listen or converse with someone and hear their viewpoint, which is essentially a polar opposite of yours, and listening to the reason why they have those views. I think that's really important to get yourself out of the echo chamber that you form around yourself. I think that's the most effective way and the best reason why we have to converse with people, especially with those that we don't know or aren't very familiar with.
Definitely agree with that, because when you leave your little bubble of everything you know and everything you're comfortable with, when you converse with a new person or a stranger or someone you may know but don't talk to on a regular basis, you're learning new things. So that's why it's important to listen as well. I'm going to go back to that point because I think it's really important. Being able to listen and absorb that new information not only makes you like a better conversationalist, but it also makes you a better person, because that's self-growth that's happening there. That's essentially like what we made our podcast about too. It's because Jenny, Teresa, and I, we all listen to each other after our research, and this entire thing is just us listening and absorbing. And that's how we are improving ourselves. And it's because of these great conversations that we're able to learn more about the world around us. So that's how it can be even outside of a podcast, just like a normal conversation between someone that you see on the bus every day that you don't talk to. You can just say, "Hey, how's it going?" Or even like you don't even have to say like the boring line, "Hey, how are you?" You can go into something funny that just happened, like, "Wow, I just failed this exam." And the person will immediately feel comfortable around you because you just brought something up out of nowhere that they can relate to on some level.
Yeah, I know. I was just in a meeting with a bunch of people I had never met before, but it was for a scholarship kind of thing. But all of these kids, we were all planning on going to the same college, but didn't know each other at all. And so we were able to just kind of talk and get to know each other, where we were from. And I know it was definitely hilarious, and it brought us all kind of together when somebody would mention something like, "Oh, well, I didn't start working on this scholarship until the night before," and someone would say, "Oh, well, I didn't start till the hour before." And just getting to talk about something we all related to, but was still a funny conversation, was kind of nice. And getting to just talk to those kids that I never met before, but and come from all these different backgrounds and places, but we still got to learn a lot from each other in that process as well.
To answer the question, why should people know how to converse with people they don't know, I found this one study conducted by two researchers, Elizabeth Dunn and Gillian Sandstrom, both of whom have PhDs in psychology. In the study, the researchers recruited individuals at random as they entered a crowded coffee shop in downtown Vancouver. They directed one group to have a conversation with the barista, and for the other group to be just as efficient as possible in their coffee ordering and fetching. So the first group reported leaving the coffee shop in a better mood and having a better sense of belonging in their community compared to the efficient group. And this study was published in 2013 in the journal Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. So the co-author, Elizabeth Dunn, she said, "It's impossible to know from the data how this mood-boosting strategy compares to other methods or how long the effect would last. But it's a low-hanging fruit. They're still valuable thing, like conversations are still valuable to have, because even if it's for a short period of time, you still feel better because you were able to interact with a fellow human being." And there was another study conducted by these two researchers where a group of students were asked to carry around counters and keep count of all social interactions over the course of their day. Having more social interactions led the students to report greater levels of happiness and well-being. And I just found that like really interesting because even though you hear all the time, oh yeah, like humans are social creatures, they need to be social. Like this is proof that being able to talk to people that you don't really talk to, it makes you feel better because of that sense of learning and belonging.
I think it's definitely something that I know. It feels good to have a good conversation with somebody. It feels good to walk away knowing that you learned something, or that you made somebody's day better, or you made somebody's day just that little bit more interesting. And to have that interaction with somebody else and for it to go well, I know I have conversations that I'll never forget just because it was either memorable, funny, or I learned something from it.
I know we talked about listening a lot and kind of like experiences from elementary school, so I kind of want to combine the two. So, what were some like basic tips that you learned how to have a conversation in like elementary school? Because I know for sure I was in my computer class one day in like second grade, and they were making us watch this brain pop video about good and bad things to do in a conversation. So it was like this one guy, I forget, he was like white, brown, spiky hair, always had a white t-shirt on, something like that. And he was talking to this one girl. And in the example of how not to have a conversation, he was just like looking around, not paying attention, talking to other people that weren't her when they passed by. And for the good conversation, he would sit there and listen and ask questions once in a while or respond. And it was just like, that's kind of like all that I've learned about how to have a conversation in elementary school. I learned more through middle and high school, like more experience talking to people that were new and I didn't talk to on a daily basis.
Record, the brain pop, I don't know if it's still the same guy, but the old brain pop guy's name was Abraham. Don't remember his last name, but I found that. Just figured I'd throw that out there. But I know for me, definitely did not learn a lot about conversation in elementary school. I think like what you were told is always make sure like you're looking at the person, you're making eye contact, the occasional smile and nod to make sure that you look like you're listening, but they never tell you to actually listen or to understand what the other person's saying, which I think is a flaw in how they taught it to me back then. I definitely learned most of my conversational skills getting into high school and just through experience, definitely.
Speaking of the smile and nodding, that's a great transition into this one video that all three of us had to watch. For band, it was like for our homeroom class, I guess, kind of, not really. So our band teacher, Mr. I, who was okay with us giving him a shout out, so shout out to Mr. I for showing us this video because it's great. It is a TED Talk conducted by Celeste Headley, 10 Ways to Have a Better Conversation. In this, one of her more notable quotes, I'm going to paraphrase, is how if you are actually paying attention, you don't have to like smile and nod or show that you're paying attention. Because if you're listening, you don't have to show that you're listening. Like, the other person can just tell.
I just thought it was funny that she brought up those, key signs, how to know someone's listening. Well, why do you need to project how much you listen or indicate or exaggerate your motions as if you are going through the motions? This is like how to get away with not listening by pretending you're listening, by doing, doing the nod, making eye contact. That doesn't indicate to the person that's talking that you're actually taking in what they're saying. It just shows that, hey, this person looks pretty invested in the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely think that video kind of was what I wanted to hear. Because I know there's a lot of times that I don't look at a speaker, but I am very intentionally listening and I want to hear what they have to say. But I'm just kind of staring at something, comprehending what they have to say. That might not be their face. I feel bad just staring at them as they talk. But I think the lady was very right that instead of giving all these tips about how to look like you're listening, actually just listen. Take in what they have to say. Don't think about what you're going to say next. Just comprehend what they're saying and try to learn something from it.
Definitely. And yeah, if you're genuinely listening, you don't have to show you're listening. And she also, like most of the stuff we talked about in this video, she also touched on a bit how it's important to have conversation with people that you're not comfortable with, mainly because the older you grow, the more you grow, the more conversations you'll have to have with like repairmen or coworkers and all of those people that come to your door or you have to go out of your door to see every day. When Genevieve brought up the flaw in teaching how to have a conversation, I kind of want to touch on that because there's an important quote that Miss Celeste Headley said. So she was saying how a high school teacher wrote an article in The Atlantic about his experience giving his students a communications project where they had to speak about a specific topic without notes. He said, and this is a quote, "I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation?" And I kind of want to just think about that.
I definitely agree that conversation is one of the biggest topics that isn't taught today. Just in terms of it's something that is so valuable and something that every human being on the planet needs to know how to do. You don't need to be able to speak 3 languages. You don't need to be able to give a presentation on the spot. You just need to be able to comprehend what somebody's saying, take some information and learn from it, and then just express your own thoughts from what they said. And I think it's something that not only isn't taught today, but it's something that needs to be taught at a younger age as well.
I also think it's the formulation of thoughts. Like when Sonia, you brought up the whole, hey, the teacher's giving out this assignment about having a kid present without note cards. I think, yeah, crafting a response is a lot harder when it's on the spot and it's an immediate thing rather than taking half an hour to make sure, hey, this is what I want to talk about, this is the points that I want to get to. Obviously time is a big factor, but I think we as people in general need or should at least start learning how to formulate a response quicker, but not quicker in the sense that it's an immediate response. Just craft an in-depth response to what the person is saying, which is ironic considering how I stumbled through that very statement about making a response to someone. So
yeah, and that's a great transition into kind of like the 10 ways to have a better conversation, where one of them was, the biggest one is listen, of course, but she also talked about not multitasking, to be present in that moment and don't pontificate. It goes back to my point of the whole blogging thing where you can just say your entire opinion and then you are allowed to leave the computer screen because there's no one that's going to respond face to face immediately. She also talked about using trying not to equate your experience with theirs and not repeating yourself because it's condescending and boring to do that, and when you're equating your experience with theirs, that cheapens their own experience a little bit.
She also mentioned going with the flow, and I think that also ties in with, if you don't know something, don't just say you don't know it. Just let the conversation happen as it is. Oftentimes I think we as people really need to take control of something and be on top of it, but especially with technology and just modern times. But honestly, if you just kind of relax and let go, I know it's hard, especially coming from someone who is very, who has a tendency to control things. Just sort of let it go, let it happen as it happens, and if you really have a good point to bring it up later. Just kind of let it go on. And I also think that ties in with staying out of the weeds. She mentions don't bother with the specific details if they aren't totally relevant to the actual topic at hand. Don't get too hung over mentioning what specific years or specific day or names if all of it doesn't really contribute to the punchline or your overall general idea.
Yeah, I kind of want to touch on something I believe Sonia mentioned just a little while ago. And it's not completely related and could be a topic for another day, but just being able to be vulnerable and take criticism is another really good skill to have, especially in terms of conversation, because it'll come up, even like accidentally someone will say something. But being able to have that balance, which I know is something I'm trying to work with, is trying to have that balance between confidence and humility, and like being humble but also confident, is something that if you can have that and contribute that to a conversation, it makes not only the conversation much lighter, but also much more open and honest.
It goes back to why it's so difficult to have a conversation, because so many unknowns, but also you're being vulnerable and putting your own thoughts out there, and it honestly, it will be hard to have someone disagree or negate your viewpoint based on their experience or like based on facts. If you have this preconceived idea and you come across someone else who kind of shakes up your worldview through other facts and experiences, it's kind of hard to deal with, not gonna lie. And that I think that's definitely a factor for people to retreat back into their echo chamber and just surround themselves with similarity instead of continuing to go on, because again, we're very vulnerable when we put ourselves out there. So
I think we can now transition into now that we're talking about vulnerabilities and stuff and putting yourselves out there, what were kind of like your pet peeves when you had conversations with other people?
Personally, I think maybe, I don't even know, there's very little that bugs me in a conversation, because I can understand when people get distracted with something. But I think it's when people, not obviously, because sometimes it's not obvious, but when I kind of notice that they've stopped paying attention to what I'm saying, which is fine. Sometimes I tend to carry on, and I understand that. But when I notice that they've stopped listening, but then they attempt to continue as if they'd been listening the whole time, when kind of what they're saying, I understand that they weren't fully paying attention. If someone were just to say, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I stopped paying attention to that last bit. Could you repeat that?" Or, "Oh, I'm sorry. I dropped out for a little." But and then move on, kind of thing. But just kind of admitting that you stopped paying attention is something that I wish people did more, because then we would understand maybe you didn't find that as interesting, or maybe you'd like me to repeat that. Or again, people just get distracted, and I think it's, again, a little bit more open and bring some honesty to the conversation, that if you just try to ignore it and act like you never stopped paying attention, it really shows and can dampen the conversation.
I'm glad you brought up honesty, because I feel like today, when we're having a general conversations, honesty isn't really at a forefront. So this will tie in to my point. But another a pet peeve of mine is when I ask an open-ended question, namely why. I brought up, I had this example when I was talking to someone else, and I'm like, yeah, imagine a scenario where someone, the person that you're conversing with, suddenly says, "Oh, I plan to get 50 some tattoos." My first response is why, and I obviously the why includes what on earth made you decide it was a good idea to have 50 some tattoos, and then that's quickly shoved out, and then I would think, what pushed you to this decision? Was there like a traumatic experience, or what why? Like, you can only get an answer that's so open and I guess honest if you just simply ask why. It's an open-ended question, and that's why reporters use sentence starters like why, what, how, so that it gives the other person a chance to interpret their question in their own way and give them the chance to say, this is where I want to take the narrative. So by responding to why with why not really like makes me angry because well I want to know, and this sort of forces me to say which of my 200 questions do I want to ask that's packed into why, you know? I let you have the opportunity to say, well, it was because of this, or it's because of that, or I just felt like it, or whatever. And especially the last point, if you don't have a reason to do something, then that's completely fine. And it goes back to honesty. I think people feel very compelled to say they should have a very elaborate and detailed explanation for something. But honestly, at the end of the day, do we really need a detailed and elaborate explanation? I mean, that's great, but if you want to get 57 tattoos, go right ahead. I'm not stopping you. Honestly, but again, this obviously ties back to, you know, very small decisions that may not impact a lot of people, you know, dyeing your hair, all the colors of the rainbow, or getting 57 tattoos. That really only applies to you. Smaller, like, the idea of reason and being honest with not having a certain specific reason doesn't apply to, let's say, a banker who is skimming off of his clients, or a politician that isn't very forthcoming about certain legislation. Like, those decisions impact a lot of people, and I believe in those specific scenarios, answers should be provided. But in general conversations, we're so wrapped up with, oh, I should have a really good reason of why I'm doing this or how I'm doing this. And if you don't, I personally believe that's okay. I just want to know the reasoning behind it. And by asking why it's so open and sort of vague, that's the point. You can take it where you want to go, and it goes back to go with the flow. Take the conversation where you want to take it. By responding with why not, that just stops the conversation short, and I'm just like, okay, I don't want to continue because, you know, it's a curt response.
You mentioned going with the flow near the end, and that kind of ties in a little bit with my pet peeve. So I just hate it, even outside of conversations, I just hate it when I'm interrupted. Because I have a thought and I want to get it out there, but then if I can't even get like 50% of that thought out because the other person just interrupts me to bring up a point that I barely brought up, I just like there was this instance last year where I was with a group of friends, and I think I was talking about a movie that another person asked about. It was Alien, and I was trying to explain to them like the plot of Alien and how it tied into the other Alien movies. Constantly interrupted the entire time, and at that point, like going with the flow, I just kind of gave up talking altogether, and I don't know if I just got up and left or if I just like I definitely know I gave up talking, and it ruined my entire day.
And that's the thing. I guess there's a line between where we go with the flow and where we go back and, you know, remind the person that we're conversing with about the point that they had. So, yeah. I guess, honestly, getting interrupted is never a good thing. So.
I agree. I think it's very important that some people are able to finish their thought, but it's also hard. I know, like, because just trying to keep a conversation flowing, and I know sometimes when people bring up a point, you get someone else gets another thought and they immediately want to say it. I know I'm definitely somebody that interrupts occasionally, and I feel bad when I do it, and sometimes I don't realize when I do it. And that's the thing, is trying to find that balance between making sure you are listening to what others have to say and wanting to say what you want to say. And I know there's a couple times where I'll be talking and someone will bring something up, and I'll just stop. And I'm okay with it when someone interrupts me. But also the fact that I want to talk about what I want to talk about, but then at least that point it gets so far away from the conversation that it's not relevant anymore, and I'm no longer going to bring it up. So it's a fine line.
In the spirit of a podcast episode about having a conversation, does anyone else have any other points they want to bring up and talk about?
Honestly, I think we covered basically everything there is to about conversation. I think we ourselves had a pretty good conversation about this, so thank you for that. If anybody else had any other ideas, yeah, let's go for it.
Definitely covered a lot, and I'm pretty happy with everything we talked about for the most part. Like, it was all pretty valuable, succinct points that were being made, and I think, yeah, this was good.
Yeah, so on that note, thank you for listening to us having a conversation about how to have a conversation. Very meta. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a like and comment down below with your most memorable conversation.
And of course, one more shout out to our band instructor, Mr. I. Let us know what other new ideas or topics that you want to see on the show. Thank you for hanging out with us, and be on the lookout for our next episode.